And you're listening to Tech.Radio, a source of news and commentary about technology and science. You can hear us each week with the podcast at Tech.Radio, or if you live in Missouri, on KOPN Columbia 89.5 FM, Mondays at 6. This week we have Brad.
Hey, everybody.
And myself. And we probably should start this show with a little bit of an aside. Last week we experimented with Mozilla Hub in recording the show, which had its pros and cons as a recording mechanism for a podcast. But we actually did put the video up last week on our YouTube channel. And this week we're going to do something similar, but with a different technology. This one is with sococo. You can think of sococo as being like a two-dimensional version of Hub. You show up as an icon, and you see your face change color while you're talking. That's probably not a good way to describe that, is it? It flickers.
Well, it's like a God's eye view, looking down on the floor plan of a building with icons that represent the people who are there, and then as they speak, the icons flash, and you can see their position in the rooms relative to each other. So it's kind of there was an older gaming style like this where you're kind of looking down from the sky and you moved your characters around. I forget what they called that gaming style.
Yeah, it wasn't true 3D. There was an old style where, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It was like played that way. There was a whole bunch of games in that
very top-down look. So you could look around, you couldn't see above or below you. What you could see is in front of you and behind you, or actually, I guess, north, south, east, and west. It was like literally watching it on a map as you walked around and the map moved with you. Yeah. And this particular tool, sococo, is used for, generally speaking, by organizations, schools, and companies more often than not. And the idea is that it gives you a sense of collection when you're in a particular room. And you can jump around from room to room, or you can close the door in a room if you want privacy. You can't hear what's in the next door room. You have to actually go to the room in order to hear it. So the audio conferencing's just blended right in. There's also video conferencing. Not that we're going to turn that on for this because we're on a podcast and a radio show. But actually, if you do want to see the results of what we're doing, though, we'll put this up on YouTube as well. And it's an interesting idea, and we'll play around with different stuff as we go along. But
you use this in your workday, right?
I use this every day during the week. Yep.
And do you like it?
To be blunt, I like it when it works. They've got some bugs they need to get fixed. Because what they're trying to do is an audio conferencing system inside of a web browser. And the problem is I also use about 3 or 4 other web conferencing systems, and the web browser the microphone doesn't get along with the other systems. So if I'm in WebEx for a little while, or if I'm over in Google Meeting and I try to go back to sococo, I may have to reset my browser and restart over. I mean, it's a trivial thing. Doesn't take that long. It delays everything by 10 seconds, but it gets frustrating after a while. And every once in a while, as you're just moving from room to room, you'll lose your mic. It's like, But other than that, yeah, I actually like it. Because with a regular audio conference or video conference, you just lose context. What are we doing? Where are we? Who's with me in the room? I mean, you can kind of tell that with a video conference, sort of, but you lose something in the process. I know it sounds trivial when it's described, but when you're on it a lot, it starts to make a lot of sense. You go, oh, okay.
I could see it that, if you're in a video conference with 2 or 3 other people, there's 2 or 3 other people that you're interacting with. But what you don't see is the 30 or 40 other people that are also working, kind of on the same big project, but aren't talking to you. And the nice thing about an environment like this is that you could see that, Bob is meeting with Mary, and I don't know what they're talking about, but they're talking about something, and there's all these people online, and if I wanted to talk to them, I could click on them and talk. So it kind of does give a lot of context and perspective.
Yeah, that's it. It's context and perspective that you get back, which gives you you get more comfortable with what you're doing when you're doing it that way, because It sounds like a small thing. It's one of those things you almost have to experience yourself to go, oh yeah, I kind of see this being kind of nice. And in fact, my impression when I first started using it was that this is what's missing from Zoom.
Now, looking down on this, there's a boat on the pier outside, and I really go on the boat, and
they won't let you on the boat.
That seems
it's a tease. I tell you, it's a tease. You can only work inside the building. Yeah, why even show the boat if you can't get on it? That should be a meeting room. Yeah. Oh, and even small things like, as you know, there's a lunchroom just below, just to the south of us. When people are at lunch, they go into the lunchroom, and more often than not, they turn their mics off because you can see whether their microphones are on or off visually. So you can see whether they're there and you can talk to them or not during lunch or not during lunch. It's like I said, a subtle thing, but it's kind of like, it gives you, okay, who's where and who's doing what. There's break rooms. There's water coolers. I don't know too many people actually use water coolers, but still, they're there.
They're there, yeah.
Want to hang around one.
Time to eat.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about this week?
Well, ironically, it scrolls into the reactions of people during the pandemic and how they're treating the technologies around them. And for this show, we're going to really dive into games. Gaming has changed a lot in the last year. And for those who aren't gamers, this probably never made it to the news, what the trends are, but they just had a distinct trend. And what brought the story to mind at first was some stats I was looking at, but you were mentioning earlier that you had some effects it had on your family and friends.
Oh yeah, certainly. The things that I've seen, I'm sure that for the next 30 years, they're going to be studying the effects of COVID on social groups and how our lives changed during this time. But you didn't have to look very far. I saw it, right around me, in terms of what my family members did, both using technology and not. I saw my sons. I have two sons, both college age now, and when we went into lockdown, they came home. We're spending time here, but immediately they were already very active gamers, but they started spending more deliberate time in the kind of the immersive gaming environments, because that's how they could socialize with their friends. And my mom, is a retiree, and she's not in any way a gamer, but she started spending more time on Telegram and text messaging environments where she could communicate nearly real time with family. It was remote because she didn't have anybody in her bubble that she could see every day, and using that technology allowed her to stay connected all the time. And we started playing even things like we had a family Telegram group. We're sending messages to all 20 or 30 people in the extended family. And we started playing, kind of games of, where there'd be a challenge topic for the day. It could be, outdoor or something like that. And everybody had to post a picture. And whoever's picture got the biggest laugh, got to set the next topic. So we started almost inventing these little distractions that made connection to our group, a little easier. So I'm really curious to hear what happened in terms of more organized and structured games, because everybody needed more social interaction. So it seems natural that they would go to the gaming environment to get that.
Yeah. Well, that corresponds with one of the three effects that seemed to really strongly hit during the pandemic. And that was one of them. And this didn't start right away. About halfway through the year last year, more and more games came out with a social element that really started driving those games in a way I don't think would ever have occurred prior to the pandemic. One of the biggest sellers of last year, two of the biggest sellers of last year, one was a fairly new game I shouldn't say new game. It's an old game that went nowhere almost. It was called Among Us, and I don't know if you've heard of this game. It's a game where you and about 4 or 5 of your friends play at the same time, and one of you is a monster, and the other 4 or 5 are not. But no one knows who is what. Think of it as like what's that old board game that's a murder mystery? Clue.
Like Clue.
It was like Clue, but played live.
Okay.
And you run around this spaceship and you start fixing breaks in the spaceship. So the idea is one group is trying to fix the spaceship and live long enough to survive, and the other one randomly chosen player, and it's chosen at random at the beginning of the game. His job is to pretend he's fixing the spaceship, and yet when the opportunity arises, to kill one of the people. And then after a death happens, if it gets reported, everyone meets together and they choose one of them to be who they think is the monster, and they throw them overboard. And they only learn later whether they chose the right person or not. It's a very interesting game, but it's very dark, but it's very social. In fact, my son was talking about playing with it, and he started playing in the beginning. He was playing it with strangers because it's got a system where they can automatically meet you up with other people. But his later games, he said he's really pretty much just played with friends because it's so much more active with people. You start banging on each other and that kind of stuff because it's fun. But that game is not a new game. It became a new game during the pandemic because the game, I think, had been written like 2 years ago. And it had a little bit of a following, but it kind of meandered. It wasn't until the pandemic that it took off. People started really liking it. A lot of the other games that are like Fortnite or PUBG, I forget what that stands for, but they're like games.
Player Unknown board game or Battleground. Player Unknown Battleground. That's it. Player Unknown Battleground.
And they're all games where it's a fight to the finish, the last person standing wins kind of thing. But what really made them take off wasn't the fight, because you can get a shooter anywhere. What really made them take off is that you could wear costumes and brag to your friends. It was the social element. In fact, they started holding concerts. People started doing announcements and stuff, and various parties were taking place without any fighting. They're actually dance parties and that kind of stuff, because it was the social nature of the network that really made it take off. A third game that's growing like a weed right now, like I said, it was one that was prior to the pandemic, but it really started to catch steam right about halfway through it last year, which it was Roblox. And it's a kid-oriented game where you're in a 3D world, and you, like the one my kids play all the time, is pet adoption, because people can make their own worlds in Roblox. And pet adoption is where you literally go around and you adopt pets and you help them grow, and you have to feed them and wash them, and but you're doing it with other people that you're playing with, and that's how my kids play it. They play it with other friends of theirs, and so they're doing it collectively. And sometimes they work a shift at one of the restaurants, and they may sell pizza to one of their friends for Roblox money. I be honest, I don't 100% sure how that game works. They tell me about it all the time, mind you, but not in a way that helps me understand how it really works. But I'm
curious whether you read a bunch of different studies related to, or articles about how pandemic has changed gameplay, and I'm curious whether there is there's a trend towards more open-ended, where the group creates versus sort of a canned, pre-programmed experience that you play. Is it, if it's social, then it should be about the social, the interaction that happens, and the collaborative creative process that happens. Did you see that?
Yes. I mean, this wasn't the only trend that occurred during the pandemic, but open worlds took off even faster. But do keep in mind, though, that open worlds, kind of like Minecraft, where you could build your own worlds, those were already picking up steam. The idea that you and your friends could collectively build something. In fact, over the course of the last year, one of the projects for Minecraft, in fact, is for building the entire planet Earth in there. And they're literally manually mapping out cities, one city at a time.
Oh, wow.
And recreating all the buildings and streets in it. I don't know that they'll succeed in the long run because they got a long ways to go.
One would think you could tackle that algorithmically somehow. A script.
You can, but it never really works really right because in the end you can't get below like about a half meter in resolution from satellite images.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do the early mock-up, but if you want to look like it's the street in that particular city you're walking down to make it really look like that, someone's gonna have to put some detail in there.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's don't get me wrong. Yeah, they're using all kinds of map software to get them started, but in the end, they got to tweak it by hand, all of it.
So what was the most surprising thing that you saw in the change in how we're using games?
Yeah, there were two trends that I saw that I wasn't necessarily expecting, although now that I see it, I go, oh, yeah, I kind of see that now. But the social aspect I already knew about. I think a lot of people have figured that out. In fact, I think the gaming industry has. I mean, what they were doing as kind of a half-hearted thing in the past, like an extra feature for their game as you play with your friends, now they're thinking of it as that's what sells the game. And if we don't get that right, we've lost our audience. The other two trends we saw, the one I was really shocked by was the move from mobile to desktop gaming.
Really?
And I gotta word this correctly because mobile gaming increased last year. So it wasn't that mobile gaming didn't increase in size. That market actually did go up. But it was it went up by about as much as it did in 2019.
Okay.
So it wasn't a huge trend that had anything to do with the pandemic. There was, in fact, Unity came out with a quasi-biased report because keep in mind their Unity is a game engine. For those that don't know, that aren't programmers that do gaming, it's a game engine used to make games, and so they asked questions of their own audience, so it's skewed towards their audience. But they sell this game engine makes it really easy to make both desktop games and mobile games. And what they saw is that sales and interest in mobile games shot up when the pandemic first started. Mid-March through about May, the start of May, there was a big boom, a big increase, about a 30% increase sustained over that period of time in interest in
mobile when
gaming.
everything was locking down and everybody had a lot of free time.
Yes, that is when that started.
Okay.
And then it started dwindling back down again, but it was still growing. So you got to be careful. It was still above last year's levels. But what we saw really hit hard in July and through August and throughout the rest of the year was desktop gaming took off. To a non-trivial amount, my show here is spiking at about 125%, so it more than doubled. In the PC, the desktop gaming sales market is not small. Double in size is just insane, and it happened rapidly about halfway through the pandemic.
Looks like it's spiking around October.
Yes. I think there was some extent people having to back off a little bit when they had to go back to school for your younger audience, both college and high school. And trying to predict behavior out of graphs is tough. So you can't see that for sure. But also in this report and in various other reports, I'd actually looked up quite a few reports for the show. They show some very similar trends in a lot of other things. Now, desktop gaming and mobile gaming, there is a correlation between casual use and hardcore use. In other words, how many hours per day do you play? And that wasn't in this report, but was in other reports I looked at. The number of hours played per day went up quite a bit over the course of the pandemic. So people weren't looking at, I'm going to put it here, I'm going to do my guesses is what it is, but I can't tell you why for sure. My guess is that people prior to the pandemic were very busy, but they were also traveling a lot. They were driving to work. They were going to meetings. They were doing everything in person. And so their really only way to game and get entertainment was to use a phone because, you're on the bus or you're in the car. You're not supposed to be gaming in the car, but they were anyway.
Okay.
And you were, and so there was lots of opportunities to sneak in a little bit of casual gaming between meetings. So you didn't want anything that would lock your attention for 5 hours. And then when you got home, you already have that habit of using your phone for entertainment. So you may not have even turned on your computer at the house. Whereas what changed when we started going remote for a lot of folks is that you were on your computer all day anyway. It was a laptop and it was set up in your house and it was already on.
And maybe even upgraded. If you all of a sudden were working remotely,
Right.
you may have spent some money, or your company may have spent money to, to upgrade your hardware. But
Yeah,
you were definitely using it more.
You've got better graphics, a slightly better computer, and you've got broadband now. A lot of people added broadband during this thing because they had to.
Sure.
And so you now had a machine that could do very intense gaming for long periods of time and with good bandwidth to the internet for multiplayer gaming if you wanted to, or that wasn't the purpose of getting your laptop at home to do that. The purpose of it was to get Zoom meetings to work right. But hey, it's working right. So
the thing is, once you get Zoom and the virtual meeting right, you've got everything you need for a better gaming experience.
Yes, exactly. And so what we saw over the course of the pandemic is people were playing it more. So the amount of time they're willing to invest, instead of it being like 5 minutes between meetings, it was 2 hours in the evening. And they were willing to spend money on it more. In general, spending increased about 30 to 40% on games during the pandemic because it was a better return on investment. This is true for both the social gaming as well as, for lack of a better term, AAA gaming. I should probably explain what I mean when I say that.
Yeah,
AAA gaming is when a game studio puts the amount of time and effort and money to produce enough content like you would see for like making a blockbuster movie for the movie theaters. You're not going to get some casual independent gamer to pull this off. They're willing to put time and effort into the code and the graphics, but way more important than anything else, they're willing to put so much content into the game, so much story and audio and visuals and graphics and movie scripts or visual video scripts that you actually have an immersive, very compelling game that you could literally play for 100 hours and still never see the same thing twice in a row.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because they put that much time and effort into it. And it may cost you hundreds of millions of dollars to create a AAA game. That's why they call it AAA. It's like at the top of the field. But you're also willing to spend $60 to $80 for it too.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a game. It's not like a movie where you'll watch it for 2 hours and you're done. You're gonna be playing it a long time.
Right.
But it's also usually very intense because again, that same content you're paying for also means you're playing it more. Those games also did very well during the pandemic. So it wasn't just the social direction, but the combination of social with titles that are coming out right now that are halfway AAA, I think we may see some real blockbusters coming up in this next year, I suspect.
In the studies that you looked at, a lot of this is looking at the sales of games or the popularity of development environments. And was there anything that was looking at demographics? Are the gamers changing in this thing?
I saw a few with demographics, but nothing that really jumped out at me. So I wish I had more of a story there, but I don't. You're talking about the age of the gamers, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that may be something we have to wait decades to find out the answer to.
Yeah, I have a suspect. So they did show that different categories of games did better than others. Actually, let me get that particular. Actually, the Unity report's been very usual because it showed pretty much across the world. I got a few demographics here. Different regions of the world, they also saw increases, although Japan and China did better than everyone else, but not by a lot more. So it wasn't a massive thing. Different categories of games did better than others. Surprisingly, word games did really well. Actually, let me get to the actual growth. This is a particular diagram I'm looking at that had to do with ad revenue growth. Most games either make money off ads or they make money off of in-app purchases or purchasing the game in the first place. And so you got to take this with a grain of salt. But the two categories that did very poorly, in fact, the one that actually shrank was sports.
Interesting.
No surprise there because there is no sports to correlate with it. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you had playing a basketball game, you didn't have to have actual basketball playing on TV. But I think those are connected in the sense that watching basketball on TV reminds you that, oh, yeah, it'd be fun to get a game that plays basketball.
That's something I'd never really thought about, that the usage of games like that might be correlated with a season. That when basketball is popular, online basketball games might be more popular. I never connected that.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
And the other one that's not shocking here is casino. It grew by 4.6%, which is hardly anything. Basically, that's probably within the.
That one does surprise me.
That's probably within the error margin. So it's really basically nothing changed in casino gaming. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that.
People couldn't go to a casino in person. That those who really get a thrill from the gambling experience might migrate to online casino type games.
Well, maybe.
Doesn't seem
certainly,
to be.
On my personal level, the only times I play casino games on my phone is when I know I'm actually going to Vegas and I want to practice my card counting. But I don't know. I suspect that's me. I don't think that's a general trend.
I don't think that's a general trend.
Yeah. Although the sarcastic part of me wants to say, well, casino games shrank because of the Robinhood app.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's not technically casino; it's investing,
right?
With small amounts of money, and it goes ding, ding, ding when you win.
Even though the casino category was, the smallest one that was still in positive territory, the largest one in positive territory was card games.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that either necessarily. Because I don't think card games went social, so I don't know. People just got bored and started playing more card games. I really don't know the answer to that one. Trivia did really well too. Board games.
These might be games. In the long run, we might find out when we know the sociology that goes with it and the demographics that these are games that will appeal to an older audience that was very much affected by the pandemic and very isolated. That maybe it was the older generation and the games they feel comfortable playing are card games, trivia games.
That's true.
Single player.
That's true. And again, this is a correlation, not a causation. But the ad revenues, which is the chart we're looking at here, ad revenues as a means of paying for a game tends to be for the mobile platforms. And I can see the older generation doing the casual card game on their mobile as being what they're doing when they're bored, whereas they're probably not booting up their old desktop computer as much. But I'm just guessing. I really don't know.
Well, let me turn this and ask about the direction is because the pandemic won't last forever. At some point, we're going to get past. What do you think is going to be the effect on gaming long term? Is this a trend that is here to stay? Or are we going to shift back to, the way things used to be?
Some of these, I think, will keep on going. I strongly suspect the desire to have social elements in your games is one of those things that once you've really started experiencing it, you don't want to go back. It's like when a young kid learns what sugar tastes like. They won't stop liking sugar. There's no returning on that one. Now, will we switch back to mobile more? That's possible. I could see that. Will we switch back to more casual? Yes, less extent probably, but I suspect we might. But I think the social part's there to stay and might even grow. I think I could see the industry because all the games we're talking about here, none of them were made during the pandemic because it takes a full year to make a decent game. There hasn't been enough time for the next generation of games to come out. So those are the stories for today. Thanks for listening, and as always, take care.